while we are, I'm going to let Nick in and then get started. So while people are still loading, some quick initial housekeeping. As I mentioned in the distribution email, this is going to be my last call as a facilitator, as Reed tries very hard to sort of not draw attention to herself. Starting on January 23rd, I'm going to be joining Reed and Chris in Dover as part of their team. So I am handing the reins for facilitating these calls over to the rest of our team at SRPC and RPC and REDC. So you'll see a few more new faces in rotation here taking the lead, but I'm sure the calls are going to continue to be great and useful, and I'm sure you'll see me again very soon. For this first call of the quarter, we haven't had a chance to have our quarterly facilitation meeting to set up a schedule yet. So if any of you have topics that you really want to discuss, people you want to bring in as speakers, send them our way, and we'll be sitting down on Friday to start putting a calendar together for this first quarter. But in the meantime, we thought that starting with SRPC's CEDS and a brief dust off of what we talked about last time and seeing, ideally we'd like to do a short CEDS this year that more or less says, we talked about these trends this year. If they're the same, we're going to say they're the same and move on. And if the trend has changed, then we'll put a little bit more discussion in. So we want to do this one pretty quick. Before I hop into that, final housekeeping thing, new / old face, Lucy Duffy has joined SRPC again on a part-time basis. She was an intern of ours for a little over a year, and is, Susie, what country are you in currently?
I'm in Norway right now.
So she's back in Europe for grad school, but we have brought her back to fill in while I transition, while we look for a replacement for me. And she'll also be covering a little bit later when Natalie and Sarah are out on parental leave. So welcome back, Susie. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
So look for some emails from her potentially with the notes and agendas and all of that as well. So any initial comments, questions while I pull up my PowerPoint? Where's presentation mode? Seeing none. Can I get the Zoom back and share screen? Sorry, I'm also on day 9 or today's Tuesday, day 9 of COVID isolation. So I've got a little bit of COVID brain going as well. When it rains, it pours. Okay. I have a screen up. I have all of you on the other screen. And here we go. So like I said, today's objectives, I want to try and run through this fairly quickly because I do have 8 slides to hit. But we want to do a brief overview of the trends we discussed in our economic development strategy last year. As usual with these sorts of things, we are looking to leverage your expertise in your day-to-day work. Are you seeing these trends ongoing? Have you seen any of them change? And then a little bit of time for some quick discussion if we've missed anything major or obvious with what we're putting together. We've got the same 8 themes as last year because this one is just a 1-year update. So to start with economic growth, we were talking about inflation as a big thing that was emerging last year when we were writing. Also looking at labor force participation that was starting to pick back up, and we were almost back at our pre-pandemic levels in terms of people actually participating in the labor force and holding jobs or looking for jobs. But unemployment remained incredibly low, even below pre-pandemic levels. Policy actions and government support were continuing, but we're sort of starting to peter out in terms of those programs, and interest rates were continuing to rise, particularly to combat the inflation. So people were still worried about a recession because of how those dynamics were playing out. Any thoughts on sort of current status related to any of these? I can see some of you buffier than normal, so feel free to also just chime in. Hearing none, yeah, a lot of these sort of still seem about the same to me. Inflation is, seems like it may not be going quite as bad as it had been last year, but hasn't also dramatically improved yet, it seems like. So keeping an eye on that. For business operations, it seems, or last year we were talking about business being booming, people coming out of lockdowns and wanting to spend their money. A lot of new businesses opening, a lot of old businesses just sort of being flat out because there was demand for their products, but they didn't have the workers to sort of keep up with that demand. That was a particular challenge faced by businesses in terms of employee attraction and retention, because a lot of people aren't participating in the same way they had been in prior years. And vacancy rates were fairly tight that were limiting new business growth. Lots of municipalities around our region looking for ways to expand commercial space. And at that time, bankruptcies in particular were at a low, but were maybe starting to flatten out and normalize at that point. Thoughts, comments, questions on any of these?
James, it's Laurel. How are you?
Laurel. Good. How are you doing?
Good. I would just say that, we're seeing kind of an echo of all of these themes with financing and trends with loan clients right now. Increased interest rates shake things up, particularly in the banking industry. It still remains very competitive, but, payments going up changes things. And I would certainly say that for the first time post-COVID, we're starting to see some borrowers fall behind, which just tells me that, all the cash that everyone was able to hoard, both, through savings and, I guess, sheltering, and then government aid is running out. So businesses that were already a little bit stressed are, it's really starting to come true for them that supply chain issues, inflation, retraction of consumer spending, it's all kind of starting to impact that, and we're definitely seeing a slowdown with ability to pay.
So I guess my question would be, are you seeing that as sort of, because we noted last year bankruptcies were at a record low, are you seeing things sort of return to a normal-ish level or starting to get worse than normal?
I would say a normal level right now. We're nowhere near where we were in, 2009, 10, 11. It's not at that level, but I would say like a normalization where, everyone was doing great. And a lot of that was due to inflated cash flow through federal and state programs. So now we're kind of seeing a leveling off where businesses are kind of getting used to a new norm. And And honestly, consumer spending with the increase with inflation has slowed a bit. And I think businesses are, they're not as busy as they were. Certainly like our retail service sector businesses is more what I'm speaking to, are seeing kind of a leveling off.
I'm seeing a few people nodding along. Anything else anybody wants to say about this slide?
And that's all just anecdotal, from where I sit as somebody who does business financing.
Sure.
Not pointing to any study or stat, just experience, current experience.
No, I think we're going to take some of the anecdotal from this call and use that to focus on, what we need to do a little bit more research on, and, to guide us through what we're looking for some studies or sources on as well. So thank you. It's all very helpful for the process. Any other comments on this one?
Real quick, James, I just want to reiterate, Laurel's not wrong. Everything that she said, I've actually been hearing firsthand from business owners, retail, restaurant, all of it, the exact same things that she just said. So I've had actually some business owners who would like to lay off some employees, believe it or not, but they are hesitant, where they don't know what the job outlook prospects look like in the future. So they're holding on to them, even though they don't necessarily need them.
Okay. It's sort of like, if I let them go now, am I going to be able to get anybody back if I need them? Gotcha. All right, moving. You can click. There we go. Moving on to housing. At the point we were last year, median sales price were still increasing. The number of closed sales and days on the market was continuing to decrease. Still signs of low inventory. Rising interest rates were beginning to slow the market down a little bit, but it was still incredibly competitive. And home ownership at the prices and rates that the homes were going was still unobtainable for a lot of people. Increased costs of labor and materials meant that new construction was continuing to be even less affordable, lots of price pressures. And we noted that looking through the Invest in H opportunities, I think from the SRPC region, that was only one award in Dover for 57 units. The rental assistance program was at that point was expanding into 2023. I think for some of the housing work that we've done with the regional housing needs assessment. Sorry, I can't think of names of things right now. I think similarly to what we discussed in the last slide, maybe some of these trends are leveling out a little bit. The sales prices aren't skyrocketing like they used to. We seem to be coming down from the peak, but that doesn't mean that the problem is solved or things are immediately affordable. Other comments, questions, thoughts? All right, I'll take that for a no. We talk about housing a fair amount, so I'm sure we've captured some stuff at some point. Infrastructure. We covered a lot of ground in the last infrastructure chapter, filling in a few gaps of what we had talked about previously. We were talking about new federal funding opportunities, both as resources, but then also, again, bringing back inflation, because a lot of the increased costs of construction of those projects were using up some of the funding increases. A lot of the Department of Transportation's funding through those bills, for example, was used more or less to support existing 10-year plan projects and allocate more resources to those to sort of level out and make up for changing cost estimates. Telephone networks was something that we wrote about last time because we heard something new that, there were coverage gaps that were being identified. But I don't think we've heard about anything new related to that. Similarly, cyber threats, I think we added that as something that we mentioned in terms of vulnerability of municipal infrastructure. But again, haven't seen any changes in trends, I don't think. The war in Ukraine was just starting around the time we were writing about that, and I'm not aware that cyber threats in the United States have quite reached the level of concern that some people predicted at that point that they might, but still something that we want to note. And then general resiliency to climate adaptation, natural hazards, and issues with supply chain disruptions as also things that impact the quality of our infrastructure. Mark, I see you turned your video back on. Anything to add about broadband?
Yeah, and so I should first should say that I am out of the broadband office. I have moved on, so you're going to be hearing an announcement shortly. I am now in recruit, so I took over for Cindy Harrington, who's now our deputy director. So I moved into her role. So talked to Reed actually yesterday. So James, I'll be seeing you sometime early February. But that aside, so I will be attending these meetings back on the regular. I'm very excited about that. But in terms of infrastructure, my previous role, for those who don't know, I was the broadband director until from September of 21 until a couple weeks ago. So in terms of the broadband, so for those who don't know, we released in October 23,200 locations, a $50 million contract to the co-op, New Hampshire Electric Co-op. There's a second one, and we should be announcing very shortly a second round of $40 million. We hope to have that announced sometime in February. That's built out in unserved and underserved areas. So our hope is to really make a dent in that. That's through its capital projects and ARPA. We are working on Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Matt Conserver, who's in our office, is working on that. We will get at least $100 million plus money for digital equity. There could be a lot more. We don't know. It could be $100 million. It depends on mapping issues, if you can believe it. But in our expectation in that is really going beyond the build-up, because we hope that most of our build-out is done through the first tranche, which was the ARPA funding. And infrastructure can focus on other areas like digital equity, gaps in terms of those that who can access it but can't afford it or can't digital literacy. And one other element we are looking at is, what can this money be used in terms of cellular, whether it's 5G, fixed wireless, or even beyond that? Something we have been pushing the feds to really give us an answer on is what is the universe where we can utilize this money for cellular technologies. I don't think they really thought that through in IIJA, because I think they were thinking of wired, but wireless is in many areas just as important, if not more so. So we have been really pushing on that. Matt's going to continue to do that. And so that's kind of where things stand with the broadband effort. I'm still happy to answer those questions in these meetings moving forward. So, but yeah, that's what's going on. And like I said, I will be meeting with many of you at some capacity for this year to talk about recruitment and business expansion.
Great. Congratulations on the new position. And Mark, I guess my question for the last little bit related to the broadband is, for things like the digital equity, like the mapping project, like phase 2 of the build out, is really just, is there anything we should be doing now to take advantage of programs like that, or that we can be doing, or that the planning commissions can do to support our municipalities to make it easier for them to go, okay, this is the information we need to get support out of phase 2. let's pull it together so it's ready to go and we just send it in.
Well, the way that it's going to work is the first 2 rounds were basically providers doing so, but some communities, and mostly, and to be perfectly honest, and this is actually to the credit of the Seacoast, broadband, wired broadband is not a huge challenge in this as compared to other parts of the state. North and Western Concord are bigger issues. There are areas within the Seacoast area, within this group, there are some broadband issues, certainly. But the big challengers like communities that are 95% unbuilt, and those are some of the areas we're looking at. However, once we get this second RFP put out there, we have something called the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative, and that's 75%. That's a program where a municipality and a provider work together to build out unserved and underserved areas in the community. And the state, if it qualifies, will pay for 75% of the build out. So if you have my town, so those who don't know, I live in Candy, 13 houses do not have access to internet. So theoretically, a company could come in, build out those 13 areas. If they qualify, we would pay for the state would pay for 75% of the build out. Other communities, so that's what we find in the Seacoast. A lot of it is, it's more closing the door, closing the onesies and twosies. There are some areas that don't have it more so, but a lot of the Seacoast is this street doesn't have it, or it went to this certain area and we expanded out the cul-de-sac and the rest of the cul-de-sac doesn't have it, or one side of the street. So we're looking at that, and we'll be getting more information on that. I will get, when that becomes more available, I will certainly let that know. We have interim rules in place. I think we're waiting really for the mapping that's supposed to be coming out late in February from UNH. At that point, we'll have a real good understanding of what's still not built out. So yeah, talking to your communities, finding out what challenges exists, and then we will get more information about the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative. We'll be doing webinars. We'll have an FAQ, and I think that will be really helpful.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. Anything else on infrastructure? All right, mobility and accessibility. This is something where we also pull a lot of things that we're hearing from our transportation side and from our TAC and policy committees. But generally speaking, during COVID, there were disruptions in the public transit schedule and availability that they were still sort of recovering from at that point. People with low income or disabilities or other disadvantages were disproportionately affected by the pandemic and disruptions to public transit, as people who disproportionately use public transit. The infrastructure and maintenance continue to be critically underfunded, particularly at the state level. And then issues with rising fueling costs were a new challenge. Changing driver behavior, and here we've moved on from, I think with fuel costs and driver behavior, we've moved on from public transit. Just to be clear, this is an everybody, all drivers issue. It was making the roads less safe, and this was something that a lot of studies were looking at specifically during COVID. Was, you know, yes, there are fewer cars on the road, but people are being way more aggressive than they were previously. I'm not sure what the current status of that trend is. I haven't really heard anything about it since the last update. And some of the other regional transportation networks, the CNJ buses, the Amtraks, were also, you know, beginning to slowly recover and build out their service again. Comments, questions? Age friendliness. This one, SRPC is continuing to do a little bit of work on some other projects. So we've actually started to pull some things on that already. So we have a Communities for Healthy Aging Transitions project that is ongoing and is sort of in an additional phase. And we're writing some specific community assessments and potentially looking to do some pilot projects. So more on that at some point. we're seeing a decrease in vaccination rates. I guess there's a little bit less. We've passed the initial surge. People picking up boosters. We may be getting a little bit of vaccine fatigue, news fatigue, people not feeling quite as urgent about them in the same way as flu shots. Flu rates are picking back up because people aren't masking as regularly, et cetera. Senior center programming are picking back up and returning to normalcy. Ongoing housing crisis is affecting seniors and young people, I think in particular, as sort of being people who are competing for a lot of the same housing options, but also people who are a little bit price vulnerable and finding it difficult to compete if they're on fixed or comparatively lower incomes, lower credit ratings, et cetera. Transportation, monthly ridership stayed pretty steady throughout 2022. And generally speaking was not lower than 2021. So at least moving in the right direction and stabilizing. Comments on this one? Workforce and education. We had noted the same workforce hiring and retention issues. People having a hard time finding people to fill available slots. Reed, you mentioned that that seems to be tapering off a little bit, at least for certain businesses. High turnover rates were making it difficult replacing and retraining people, and we're adding costs for employers. Low unemployment was impacting the job market because it was hard to find people. Wages have increased some, but the inflation rate seems to be outpacing that wage growth, at least as of the last time we wrote about this. And then employer organizational innovation, people were trying to think of new strategies for attraction and retention. And that's also a project that we're working on. And I have a short update on that in a bit. Anything else to say on this one? I think it's interesting to hear that some businesses are starting to think about layoffs, and I think we'd definitely be interested to see where that goes and see if there's anything that we can follow up on over the next couple months to check that out. We're getting close to the end. Community vibrancy. We were hearing a lot of interest from outside the region that businesses were attracted by the quality of life that we have to offer, and we're still targeting the Seacoast as a great place to move or expand. Outdoor dining policies were seen as being very good for business during the pandemic, and a lot of people were looking to maintain or slightly shuffle those policies for a permanent ongoing basis. This also sort of showed the importance of cultural amenities. Venues that were offering live events were gradually coming back to life, but had a lot of ground to make up for sort of the business that they had lost. Green spaces and natural resources were things that were still drawing interest and contributing to community vibrancy and economic activity. And then a boom in outdoor recreation and tourism as people were trying to get outside, more people were traveling, coming up for leaf season, hiking in the summer, skiing in the winter. We were seeing a lot of that recover in a big way. So comments on this one? Jenny?
Yeah, I just want to let everybody know that you probably saw what I popped into the chat about the art sector in general. We're still at about 78% of 2019 earned revenue. And of course, facing the same funding cliff that a lot of other businesses are. We're surveying nonprofit and for-profit creative businesses right now, looking at calendar years 2019 through 2022 to kind of see where we are with full calendar years. And I put a link to that survey in the chat, and it would be really wonderful if people could share it. And in fact, I will send it to our wonderful BEA folks and ask that they blast it out too. So thank you.
That would be great. Thank you. We'll definitely push that around to our networks, and I'll get that to people to put in our emails. Other comments, questions, concerns, issues on this one? Childcare. Capacity at childcare centers was insufficient for the number of children in the region. We found a data set that allowed us to look at where there might be childcare deserts, and it had a formula for how to calculate that based on, you know, kids at daycare age compared to centers that were available in the community or within a short distance. That data set isn't going to update regularly, but yeah, it still doesn't seem like we've solved this problem yet. Teacher shortages are still an issue. There's still sort of a lack of clarity about what happens when you know, kids test positive for COVID or are generally sick or have other symptoms, and you know, do they need to be out for longer than you know, pre-pandemic on short notice. We also had our daycare lose heat for a day because UNH's electrical grid surged and they had to replace the motor. So that was a fun thing to experience last week. Childcare is also crazy expensive and unpredictable coverage. Comments, questions on this one? I know there is a bill in the legislature that's looking at some appropriations and potential programs to try and address affordability and workforce retention in that space. So we'll be keeping an eye on how that progresses as we go. And we made it.
There is literally a committee, a special committee just on that. So that's going to be looking at childcare. So I mean, every bill that has some sort of element of that is going to that special committee. And I believe it's bipartisan. So that should be very interesting to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, definitely.
We have a state representative from Hampton that sits on that committee who's very, very pro trying to find additional funds, getting very much involved in the whole childcare arena. So that's good if we get to a point where we need to have somebody in our own geographic area that sits on that committee.
Good to know. Thanks, John. All right. So with that, any other comments, questions about SRPC's CEDS update this year? We'll generally be on a similar schedule to last year, looking at adopting the plan by June. So we'll probably be checking in every couple of months, just with a status update for where things are progressing or if there are specifics that we need feedback on. So thank you all for your input and your patience. And we will take it from here. So the next thing on our agenda that I had was a brief update on the workforce development project. I wanted to let everybody know that the subcommittee met a few times in December to review the proposals that we had. We got 4 submissions for consultants. The committee chose to interview 2 of them to get a little bit of a better sense of fit. And they were really impressed with the conversation that we had with SoHo Creative Studios. So as of, I believe, yesterday, SRPC has them officially under contract to begin that work. And we will be setting up a kickoff meeting with the subcommittee. I think we're looking at next week. And I'm sure that we will want to be putting them in front of this big group at some point as we go through that project. The scope is going to look a little bit different from what we initially put out. When we released the procurement materials, we were just trying to make it simple and easy. So we were looking for something that was more like an RFQ. What are your qualifications? What are some work samples? SoHo went a little bit above and beyond with their proposal, and they basically gave us a proposal. So we felt really good about the direction that they were headed in, and we're going to be working with them to set up some business interviews that we can use to generate some of the assets, learn about some of the information, and then probably circling back with this group again to talk about how we can distribute some of those assets and reach businesses. So lots more to come, but we are officially getting started on that part of the project. And then I think the last thing that we wanted to do for the last few minutes was to throw things over to you for some more roundtable kind of stuff. So are there any other programs or things that you're working with that you want to talk about or promote? Any challenges that you faced that you want some feedback on, or see how other people handled? Anything new and exciting that you want to share? I think Mark and I have already done our sharing for the roundtable, but anybody else? John.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick things, and these are more FYIs, but I think that we should have some future discussions on these topics. I attended a BIA roundtable yesterday with a number of stakeholders, trade associations, chambers, et cetera, to talk about the 2023 public policy priorities. And one of the things that came up out of that was a number of areas that we have already talked about. James, you have even put it into some of the slides that you just showed. But I think one of the things that we have to be very watchful of is that when the governor comes out with his budget in early to mid February, to see where some of his priorities are from a financial perspective. I know, for example, just out of, since some of you are here from BEA, there's a number of line items in the BEA proposed budget that we should be watching and looking at, and then down the road making some decisions on supporting some of those line items, especially if it includes travel and tourism, because as you know, we're in our region is big in that area. So I think that's real important. But there's also some other things that they talked about, which I think is important for us to stay on top of. And that is in terms of looking at ways of how the state can continue to support and even encourage more transportation money coming in from Washington. I personally don't think that we're getting a good share of transportation money around the country. It seems like, and this is just my opinion, but those that sit on those transportation committees that have leadership roles, seems like the money goes to their territories much more than a broader sense of distribution. So I think this is something that is really important that we as a group continue to look at. But there's just a number of things. I mean, I was just flabbergasted in my 2-hour discussion yesterday with so many pieces of legislation that's being proposed Some probably will go by the wayside before the crossover, but others might be continuing on. So I think it'll be important for us to all watch what pieces of legislation start moving and start getting some traction.
Good to know. Thanks, John. I think, again, because we wear multiple hats, if there are concerns about transportation related issues, and this may be what Tim is raising his hand to bring up, yeah, I would strongly encourage you to also, share that information with your MPO, get involved in the MPO process, with your technical advisory committee or policy committee, as the entities that handle how those or advocate for how those funds are allocated within the state, that may or may not make a significant impact with what comes into the state. But I think if there's an organization that you want to connect with on a regional basis that would sort of officially advocate for that, the policy committee is probably it. Tim?
I didn't know, James. I just had to bring up transportation, but John is absolutely right. We are dead last in federal money when it comes to transportation funding, 50 out of 50. There's a long history to that. I'm not going to go into it, but it's been a really tough nut to crack for our federal delegation. But I'll tell you this: there's a lot of money in discretionary spending through these raise grants and all these other grants that are in the current infrastructure bill. And if we want to be successful in those, we need to invest in planning and preliminary design for those opportunities. What happens is these raise grants come along and these other large funding grants come along, and our projects and concepts for projects aren't far enough advanced to be competitive. So we got to put the money that we have now into getting our projects to the point where we can be competitive for those discretionary funds. Because John, quite frankly, I don't think we're going to change the fact that we're 50th out of 50 in the next, 3 to 5 years. It's going to take a long time, if ever, that we get out of that hole, but we can do better in other areas. So just throw that out there and keep that in mind when you're talking about transportation dollars.
And I know some of SRPC's communities did have a little bit of success going through the congressional appropriation process as a way to sort of bypass the fact that there may not have been a lot of money in sort of the federal funds that trickle through the state. I think there were a few complete streets or street plus infrastructure projects that were allocated through that process and will hopefully be moving forward in the next year or two. But agree that is sort of a band-aid to try and make up for what is more of a systemic thing. Other roundtable items people want to share?
I've got one. Do we have an agenda for next 2 weeks from now, our next meeting?
We do not at the moment. We're meeting as the facilitators on Friday, I believe, to sort of lay out our schedule.
I got a call yesterday from Executive Counselor Stevens, and I know everybody in this call is not in her district, of course, but she asked how she could help businesses in our area, and I suggested, among other things, that she come on a call and meet all of you. If you'd like that, I can set it up.
Yeah, I believe we've had Counselor Stevens on before, shortly after she was elected. So if the group is interested, we can certainly bring her back.
Always interesting to hear what one of the five have to say, I think.
So did you suggest 2 weeks from now as a possibility?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
She said she could do it, but I mean, it can be 4 weeks, it can be 6 weeks, whatever. She's amenable. Yeah, I don't think there's anything
Jill, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we had anything else that was sort of time sensitive that we were looking to talk about immediately, right?
I don't believe so.
So can we, for today, go with a tentative, we'll pencil her in and confirm with the group on Friday, and then we can confirm with her after that? Does that work?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks.
I lied. I do have another thing. I meant to also include in my email and did not, the fact that my current job is posted and we're looking for somebody to fill it. So I've just dropped the link to the posting on our website in the chat. If any of you know people who you want to see up here herding cats, then send the posting along and encourage them to apply.
James, I'll just, sorry. Read
Go ahead,
me.
Jen.
Okay.
Yeah, I just popped something into the chat and I just wanted to let everybody know that I just read that article recently about how New Hampshire's death rate is outsourcing the birth rate by quite a bit. It was about 2,000, I think, for just last year. But what is increasing New Hampshire's population is migration from other New England states and immigration into New Hampshire. So if anybody is interested, I popped the article I read into the chat.
Thanks, Reed. That actually segues nicely to what I was going to mention is that SRPC and RPC were both rapidly approaching the end of our regional housing needs assessments. Tim and Jill, I'm not sure when you guys are posting your draft, we will be posting what will hopefully be a finished draft on January 20th for public review and comment. It will feature many different data bits of analysis, including it will have the new population projections for the state in there, and kind of tying to what Reed was just saying, you'll see in the out years of those projections, we're actually declining a little. But in the meantime, it doesn't solve the housing crisis. So stay tuned for what is in our housing needs assessments, and I'm sure we'll be planning to present some of those findings here to you all.
RPC folks, anything to add?
We're roughly on the same schedule. I probably won't have a final formatted draft with all the pretty graphics and everything until about second week of February, but it's largely done at this point anyway. So we're in the same range. End of January, beginning of February, we'll have something on the street. And we're actually, for those that are interested, we're presenting it tomorrow night at a commission meeting where we've invited our municipal officials from the region, select board members, planning board, and any town admins or managers that want to show up. So that's at Stratham Town Hall at 6:30. So you can get a sneak peek of what we're up to.
Good to know. All right, we've got about 7 minutes left. Any final comments? Other things people want to share? Going once? Going twice? All right, then we'll wrap it up a few minutes early. Thank you all for joining. And I guess since this is my last one, I just wanted to say thank you again for all of your participation and support. This has been a really useful resource for us at SRPC. And it's a little bit gratifying to see how this group has evolved over the years. I think it seems like we're in a good spot and it's here to stay. So thank you for everything that you've done to make that happen, because you can't collaborate by yourself.
Good luck, James.
Thanks all.
Good luck.
Thanks, James. Keep in touch.
Will do. You'll
Thank you,
probably
James.
see me soon. I may miss the next one if I'm still doing onboarding paperwork, but after that, you'll see my face again. Don't worry. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye all.